How far would you go to save someone you love? This is the ultimate motivator in Amnesia Rebirth, with fear, torture, darkness, and forgotten memories wrapped all around it. Without spoiling anything, if you're a fan of horror titles, unique storylines, or enjoyed the original Dark Descent, I highly recommend Amnesia Rebirth to you. There's something you should know about this game though, first and foremost, since the scary aspect is what drew people to the first title. This game is story first and scary second. But if you have any appreciation for slowly unraveling stories, the themes that you come across are terrifying. Loss of loved ones, isolation, losing control of your body, knowing your expiration date. Once again, Frictional has created a story that explores the back room of what makes the human psyche so vulnerable without directly stating it. Gameplay-wise, there's new twists and turns here, and bold ones at that. There's a new kind of sanity mechanic, along with the return of laudanum to heal yourself. The lantern returns, this time with a gauge telling you exactly how much oil you have left without having to open up a menu. Tinderboxes have been replaced with matches, which you can only have a finite amount of. Matches will go out if you move too quickly and are only lit for a short amount of time, so you have to manage and light all the sources you can find around you before you run out. The lighting in this game is extremely immersive. The darkness is pure. The lantern lights up just enough to see, but not enough so you're still on your toes. Lamps, torches, and candles all illuminate the environment a realistic amount, so you need to pick and choose what you decide to light up. Matches are rare at first, but become far more frequent as the game progresses. You will be hunted in this game. Most chases are tense and you'll regret it if you look behind you. You can avoid confrontation by crouching and crawling around in the shadows, but if you do this, enemies will move much quicker than you. There's also pressure to keep moving, as you will lose sanity, or gain fear as this game states, if you stand in darkness too long. I've already spoken about lighting, but as for textures, the structures and environments are pretty good. The first-person perspective of your arms and hands are highly detailed as well. You can see sweat forming and veins protruding often. Now, onto the not-so-good stuff. Piggybacking off of graphics, despite the good-looking textures and lighting, the character models could really use some work. The only models that look good are the monsters, which are probably the best area to fine-tune. This game has actual speaking and talking NPCs you can talk to and interact with. This is a step up from Dark Descent, since that game only had one person you could speak to, and he didn't have any mouth or facial animations. However, the textures on all of these NPCs look off. They don't move their bodies or faces accurately to how real people would, and they seem more robotic than anything. However, alive people are few and far between, so you won't spend most of this game looking at these models. Final note about graphics. The graphical options menu is somewhat limited. The game is locked at 60 frames per second no matter which way you cut it, which I believe is the same case in the original Dark Descent. That leaves me to believe these graphical limitations are engine related. As much as I enjoyed the new sanity mechanic, there's one thing about it I'm not so hot on. In the original, if your sanity got too low, your character would pretty much collapse and you would have very limited movement options and hear ringing in your ears. I personally didn't like this. In Rebirth, however, if your sanity gets too low, you begin getting flashing jump scare-like images on your screen. While the sound effect that plays is certainly startling, the images were all hand-drawn and kind of jarring to see, sort of taking away immersion from the experience. Speaking of losing immersion, the character you play as talks at completely inappropriate times. And by inappropriate, I mean literally speaking while monsters are looking for her. I don't have a problem with her speaking. I actually think it's a breath of fresh air from the typical silent protagonist who doesn't say shit all game but talks in flashbacks. But this character should never be talking when her life at risk, which is pretty much when she talks the most. Now I'm on to spoilers, and the reason I considered this game a beautiful mess. Summarizing my non-spoiler review, I would recommend this game at full price if you're the kind of person that's into storytelling, and I wouldn't recommend it if you're someone looking for quick jump scares. Here's my spoiler review. The story of this game is quite the marathon, and something I'm really fond of. Just like the first game, the character you're playing as, Tazzy, has her own personal motivations that reveal themselves as you recover your lost memories. If you're collecting and reading the notes, you can guess her backstory pretty easily, and by her backstory I mean her losing her first child. The game builds up to this as a reveal, but you can figure out as soon as the very first room in the cave when reading the note the expedition reader wrote, about how Tazzy and Salim need to go on this expedition to get their mind off of things. As soon as I realized Tazzy lost her first kid, I knew she would do anything to protect the second one. And I mean anything, Last of Us style. Tazzy and everyone on the expedition were infected by a dark god. They will all eventually die and become her servants, but she offered them a way out when they arrived. She would cure them and let them go if Tazzy gave her the child she was pregnant with. Tazzy refuses, and the whole crew ends up dying and or becoming eternal suffering servants because of it. But I like that she refuses, and I like the Doctor's reaction to her choice at the end of the game. There's such human reactions to these inhuman situations. I enjoy the darkness of this story between the main characters and how you feel as the game progresses that this probably won't have a happy ending. But as moral-provoking as the story is, there's so much else going on, and now we're getting messy. There's a whole separate story occurring in the Dark World with the servants of the Dark God. All of these servants are gone now and have become slaves created to be tortured and have vitae extracted from them to fuel the god's life. You find tablets written by these people instead of notes, most of them glad to be in her service and wake, and some of them regretting what they've done and trying to stop her. This Dark World is the meat of the conflict of the Amnesia universe and what ties the two games together. The orbs, the shadow, and a few named characters return in this game, mostly in reference, this time with much more added context. You even come across the expedition site that Daniel was a part of, and I didn't find any reference to Alexander, but there's plenty of references to Castle Brennenburg. I'm pretty sure Alexander was one of these servants as well in the Dark World, and he was trying to return there in the original game. But this is all happening at the same time that Tazzy is a deteriorating pregnant mess. She has no idea what any of this stuff means and doesn't have much to say about it. Though the two stories directly affect one another, I just don't think they mesh together well, especially since the Dark World is filled with essays worth of backstory written on these tablets and contained in these memories. So you're balancing the ghouls, the flying wraiths, the Dark God, the Shadow, finding your expedition crew, and managing your baby. That's an overfilled plate right there. Now, let's talk about the baby. It looks like a lot of people have a problem with this mechanic and its involvement in the storyline. I can understand the sentiment that it could be frustrating that the gameplay gets slowed down so you can acknowledge your baby. But I also understand plenty of people are just uncomfortable playing as a woman that's pregnant. And to those people I say grow up. Checking on your baby to reduce your fear makes a lot of sense to me, and it makes even more sense for this character. She was even ready to give up and die in the caves, but chooses not to since she's bearing a child. This baby in your stomach is the pure 100% reason you're putting yourself through all this stuff. Birth is even in the title, and I think childbirth is a beautiful thing. So checking on your baby, aka your motivation for this whole game, makes perfect sense and it's a great inclusion. I also like how visiting the Dark World distorts the passage of time. The notes explain this more in detail, but of course really it's just mumbo jumbo. The point being, time passes by quicker in the Dark World, and traveling to and from there affects people differently. In Tazzy's case, it sends her body a couple of months forward in time. So at every stage of the game after returning from the Dark World, she becomes even more pregnant. If I remember right, she goes through about 6.5 months of pregnancy in pretty much 1 day's time. And every time she gets more pregnant, your movement speed and interactions are slower. This is good. It makes enemies seem more threatening because you aren't able to run as fast from them. I do think Tazzy gets bonked on the head way more times than any pregnant woman should, and I wish they came up with more creative transitions for these level changes. Literally something falls on her or she smacks the ground with her face like every 10 minutes. I like how she's concerned about the baby every time she gets hurt, and I like how the game acknowledges it could have hurt the baby. But it feels like it's leaning more towards lampshading to me. I do believe the game is implying that Tazzy is slightly stronger than a normal human because of her infection, so maybe that's an explanation for why this battered and bruised baby comes out looking spotless. Overall, the story is great and deals with thought-provoking and dark themes, the kind of stuff that makes you uncomfortable to think about. The only problem is its pacing and how it's all strung together. And childbirth is at the center stage here. It's the only thing Tazzy wants. It's the only thing she has. I think the actress does a great job voice acting, along with the rest of the main cast. However, the subpar voice acting gets rewarded to most of the instances in those memory capsules. It's probably good to mention there's 3 different endings here. Just like Dark Descent, 2 of these endings are spelled out for you, and the 3rd ending you've got to do a little note reading and legwork to even know if it's available. Though it's a little more clear than Dark Descent's potion making. I went for the ending that I thought was the best, and that was the 3rd ending, Unleashing the Shadow. I really like how you turn your pursuer into a weapon. It feels like you're the Shadow's master for once, even though it doesn't have a happy ending for Tazzy and her baby. But I personally thought putting an end to the whole chain of suffering was the best ending, since it prevents anything like this from happening again. And all of Tazzy's friends were already dead anyways. And the game was making it pretty clear to me that this baby would either cause suffering, or it would die. So I chose the ending that lets you and the baby die on your own terms. Last but not least, the puzzles were satisfying, as they weren't too hard and not too easy, cooked just the way I like them. I do think a couple of the puzzles were unnecessary though. It sort of reminded me how in the original game stuff would just break down and the puzzle would be you just trying to repair this device. To summarize my spoiler review, this game made me tear up a few times, and I don't often do that. It also had me on the edge of my seat. I think it's definitely worth its full indie game price, and AAA quality shouldn't be expected, but it gets damn close. Though the story in certain sequences were certainly messy and all over the place, altogether, it's more of a unique and memorable experience than anything else. I give this Dark experience a 4 out of 5.